They did not only hurt you, they broke the version of you that kept showing up again and again, kept forgiving, kept giving chances, kept believing in something better. Under all the chaos, there was still something real that you were trying to protect. And here is the part most people never say clearly. When a narcissist finally goes too far with someone who gave them real care, something shifts in a deeper way, not always visible at first, but it happens in the background of their mind. And once it begins, it does not fully go back to how it was. What looks like their victory is often the start of something unstable inside them. And what feels like your lowest point can become the first moment you actually start seeing the truth without distortion. Before going further, take a small pause and ask yourself something honest. What did I keep accepting just to avoid conflict? What did I ignore just so things would stay calm? Sit with that for a moment, because your answer says more about the relationship than any explanation they ever gave you. Stay here with this thought, because by the end of this, you may understand that the damage was never truly about your value. It was about what your love reflected back to them. And once that becomes clear, the emotional grip slowly starts to loosen. Not instantly, but enough to change how you see everything. When a narcissist begins to devalue someone who has been steady, loyal, patient, and emotionally present, it rarely happens without a pattern. At first, there is warmth, attention, and a strong emotional pull that feels special and meaningful. Everything feels alive and intense. But over time, something changes. The warmth fades. The closeness becomes weaker. What once felt safe begins to feel distant, then critical, and eventually quietly hurtful. The confusing part is that you may not have changed your behavior. You are still caring, still trying, still understanding, but suddenly your consistency does not feel appreciated anymore. Instead, it starts to feel like a problem to them. This happens because your stability quietly reminds them that they rely on you more than they want to admit. And dependence makes them feel emotionally exposed. So instead of valuing what you bring, they begin to reduce it in their mind. Your efforts become normal, expected, or never enough. They slowly rewrite the story in their own way. In that version, you become too emotional, too sensitive, too demanding, too heavy, even when you are simply asking for honesty or basic respect. Pay attention to this shift, because this is where confusion begins. They continue benefiting from your presence while slowly disconnecting emotionally. They still receive your care, but they stop protecting your feelings. That imbalance is not random. It quietly gives them control while making you work harder for less connection. And over time, you begin to question yourself more than you question the pattern. This is where emotional damage becomes deeper than people usually understand. It is not only pain, it is a split in your perception of reality. The same person who once felt like comfort now becomes the source of anxiety and confusion. Your mind struggles to hold both truths together because it wants things to make sense. So at first, you try to explain it in softer ways. Maybe they are stressed. Maybe they are tired. Maybe something is going on. Maybe if I love better, stay calmer, try harder, things will return to how they were. This is how the cycle stays alive. You protect the image of who they used to be because accepting who they are becoming feels too painful. But even while your mind hopes, your body already reacts. You feel it in your chest, in your overthinking, in the way peace no longer stays for long. Nothing fully settles anymore. And what makes it more damaging is how personal it starts to feel. They often use what they learned about you when you trusted them. Your fears, your soft points, your insecurities, the things you shared when you felt safe. Those same places start getting touched again, but now in painful ways. Even if they never openly admit intention, the accuracy of where it hurts makes it feel targeted. And repeated exposure to that kind of emotional pressure changes your nervous system. You start watching your words, reading their tone, adjusting your behavior, shrinking your needs, not because you are weak, but because your system is trying to prevent more pain. Then mental exhaustion begins to build. This is where confusion becomes internal. You start holding two opposite ideas at the same time. One part of you remembers the caring version of them. The other part is dealing with the cold or hurtful version. The mind does not like this contradiction, so it tries to solve it. But the painful solution often becomes self-blame. Instead of saying, "This is hurting me," you start thinking, "Maybe I am the problem. Maybe I expect too much. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I should adjust more." This creates a false sense of control in something that is actually unstable. And this is where the cycle deepens. Because sometimes, after hurting you, they may suddenly become warm again. A kind word, a soft moment, a return of the old energy you once knew. Just enough to make you question your pain. Just enough to keep hope alive. And then again, the distance returns. Then criticism, then silence, then normal behavior. This back and forth keeps your mind stuck in constant adjustment, always trying to predict which version you will get next. Over time, this weakens your trust in yourself. You stop relying on your inner sense of clarity and start looking outward for answers, often from the same person who created the confusion. That is why leaving or detaching feels so difficult. even when the situation is clearly hurting you. After they hurt you, there is sometimes a noticeable change in their energy. They may seem calm, even detached, sometimes almost unaffected. While you feel pain, they may appear composed. This contrast can feel disturbing. But what is happening there is not real emotional strength. It is often a short psychological reaction tied to control. In that moment, causing emotional impact can give them a temporary sense of power. It creates a feeling of being in control of the emotional space between you. Your reaction becomes proof to them that they still have influence, that they can affect your state and remain untouched themselves. But this is not stable. It fades quickly. And because it fades, the pattern repeats. The emotional push, the reaction, the temporary control, then emptiness again. What they often do not see is the long-term effect of losing someone who gave them steady emotional support. At first, they may act as if replacing you is easy. New attention, new people, new validation may seem exciting. But novelty does not provide stability. It does not provide depth or emotional grounding. What you gave was consistency, memory, emotional presence, patience, and familiarity. That kind of bond builds over time and cannot be replaced quickly. So after the initial rush of something new fades, instability starts to appear. The new environment may not feel as emotionally steady. There is a tension, but not the same grounding. There is excitement, but not the same safety. This creates restlessness, more searching, more dissatisfaction, more shifting from one source of attention to another without real satisfaction. Because what is missing is not attention, but emotional steadiness. Even if they do not recognize it, that absence affects them over time in quiet ways. Meanwhile, something very different begins in you. At first, it is not strength. It is exhaustion. A deep emotional fatigue that makes pretending impossible. The effort to hold everything together starts breaking down, and what once felt like love begins to feel like emotional depletion. This moment is painful because awareness does not always feel empowering at first. Sometimes it feels like grief, like slowly realizing that the story you were holding on to was not what you thought it was. You begin to notice patterns more clearly. The moments you excused, the times you ignored your own discomfort, the ways you kept adjusting yourself just to maintain connection. And this awareness also turns inward. You begin to see your own participation in staying, in hoping, in overgiving, not as blame, but as clarity. And that clarity changes how you understand everything that happened. Still, this is where something important begins to form quietly underneath all the pain, where something important slowly returns back to you. Your own inner signals that you had pushed aside for a long time. The instincts you once ignored begin to make sense again. that uncomfortable feeling you kept explaining away starts to look less like weakness and more like information. The limits you struggled to keep start to feel necessary instead of selfish. This shift is big, even when it happens quietly and slowly over time. Because when your attention starts turning back toward yourself, instead of constantly chasing someone else's approval, something inside the bond begins to loosen. Not suddenly, not perfectly, but in a real and noticeable way. And if you have ever wondered why clarity often feels painful before it brings relief, this is the reason. You are not simply losing a person in your life. You are releasing a hope that was never fully aligned with your well-being. A hope that kept asking you to go against yourself. As this clarity grows, something else begins to happen that most people are not prepared for. The constant access they had to your emotions starts to fade. Your availability is not the same anymore. The way you respond changes. The openness they once relied on begins to shift. And when they feel that shift, a very familiar pattern often appears. They return, but not